Hello, I'm glad you're here. Are you feeling settled and comfortable tonight? Let's begin our quiet journey into the distant past, into the slow and rugged world of ancient Rome. Tonight, we walk into the life of a gladiator, not as a hero from a grand story, but as a real person who woke before dawn, trained under the sun, and carried both fear and hope inside his heart. This is a gentle telling of a hard life, spoken softly so you can drift, rest, or simply let your mind wander as you listen. Imagine Rome near the height of its power. The city is wide, full of stone, colour, sound, and movement. Markets stretch through its streets. Soldiers, merchants, and families go about their days. But somewhere beyond the busiest corners lies another place, quieter in the morning, harsh by midday, and heavy with the dust of training yards. This is the Ludus, the gladiator school. It is here where men live lives shaped by discipline, demand, and danger. One of those men is the person whose story we follow tonight. He wakes before the sun rises. The room around him is dim, lit only by the pale glow slipping through the small window near the ceiling. He shares this room with others, men he trains beside, eats beside, and may one day fight beside. The air is cool now, but he knows it will grow hot soon enough. He sits up slowly, his muscles stiff from yesterday's drills. Every day feels similar at first, but no day is truly gentle. Still, he has learned to move without complaint. He pulls on simple clothing, rough and plain. Nothing like the polished armor crowds imagine when they think of gladiators. Training gear is meant to be sturdy, not beautiful. He steps into the hallway where a few others already stand, stretching their arms, rolling their shoulders, rubbing sleep from their eyes. No one speaks much. Words in the morning tend to wait until the body is fully awake. Outside, the yard is still quiet. Sand covers the ground. Wooden poles stand ready for practice strikes. The sun begins to rise, slow and warm. The light touches the top edge of the training walls and spills across the sand. The gladiator takes a long breath. The morning air always feels calm, even when he knows what the day will bring. Their trainer, a tall and weathered man, walks into the yard. He used to fight in the arena many years ago. Now he shapes the next generation with strict routines, steady commands, and an eye that misses little. He calls the men to gather. They form a loose line. The trainer looks at each of them. Some are new, their faces still filled with uncertainty. Others, like the man we follow, have been here long enough to understand that life in the Ludus is a cycle of training, survival, and waiting for the next arena call. The warm-up begins. They stretch their arms, legs, and backs. They jog in slow circles around the yard, the soft thump of feet pressing into the sand. The sun grows brighter, warming their skin, loosening stiff muscles. After the warm-up, they move to the wooden poles. Each man takes a stance and begins striking. Wooden swords meet wooden targets with dull, rhythmic knocks. The sound is steady, repeating like a slow drum. The gladiator's arms move with steady effort. Strike, step guard. Strike again. Each motion must be smooth. Each reaction must be quick. The trainer watches and offers corrections when a movement is too slow or a stance too open. They repeat drills again and again. Sweat begins to form on their brows. Dust rises from the sand and sticks to their skin. Training continues for hours. Sometimes they work with wooden weapons. Sometimes they practice with shields. Sometimes they practice falling safely, knowing that the ground of an arena can be unforgiving. By midday the sun is high, hot and bright. Muscles burn. Arms shake, mouths grow dry. But they push through, because this is their life, and each small improvement might one day be the difference between life and death. When the trainer finally calls for a break, the men gather in the shade. They drink water. They eat simple food, bread, bolives, and sometimes a small portion of barley porridge. The gladiator sits with a few others he knows well. They do not speak much. Talking takes energy they need to save. Instead, they rest quietly, breathing slowly, letting their bodies settle. A few men lean back against the wall and close their eyes. For a brief moment, the yard feels peaceful. But rest never lasts long. Training resumes, this time with paired exercises. The gladiator faces a partner he knows well. They have trained together many times, and they both know the importance of trust in these drills. Wooden swords meet again, this time against another person's strength. They strike, block, and step. Sweat drips down their faces. Their breathing grows heavier. They are not trying to hurt each other, but they must train at full effort. The trainer expects nothing less. Hours pass. The sun begins to shift. Shadows lengthen. At last, the day's training comes to an end. The men wait for the trainer to dismiss them. When he does, they return to their quarters, moving with the heavy, slow steps of exhausted bodies. Inside the room, the gladiator sits on his small bunk. He drinks more water. He wipes sand from his arms. Later, he may wash in the bathhouse, where warm water and steam help ease some of the day's strain. For now, he rests. Around him, the murmurs of other men fill the room. Someone makes a quiet joke. Someone else sighs with relief. A small moment of normal comfort settles in, soft and brief. As evening settles over the Ludus, the gladiator thinks about the path that brought him here. Some men were prisoners of war. Some were enslaved by debt or circumstance. Some volunteered for the chance at fame, reward, or recognition. Whatever the reason, once inside the gladiator school, their lives followed the same pattern: train, endure, prepare. Night falls. The stars appear, faint at first, then stronger. The sounds of Rome echo in the distance, but here, behind the high walls, the world is quieter. The gladiator lies down, tired but used to this feeling. His body aches, yet he knows tomorrow will bring another day of drills and discipline. As sleep comes closer, he lets himself breathe slowly, knowing that rest is his most valuable ally. As dawn returns to the Ludus, the air is cool again. A faint breeze slips through the narrow stone corridor and brushes across the gladiator's face while he wakes. His body is sore, but the soreness is familiar, almost comforting, because it tells him he survived another day of training. In this life, he has learned to measure time not through calendars or seasons, but through the cycle of exhaustion and recovery. Each morning feels like a quiet test. Each night feels like a small victory. He rises slowly so he does not disturb the man sleeping on the bunk beside him. The room smells of sweat, old leather, and the faint earthy scent of sand that clings to everything. He rubs his eyes and stretches his arms until his joints tighten. When he stands, his legs feel heavy, but he steps forward anyway. Habit guides him now, not thought. Outside, the sky is still pale. The sun has not yet broken over the rooftops. A few other men gather quietly near the yard's edge, warming their shoulders and whispering small greetings. The trainer arrives soon after. His steps are firm, but not rushed. He is a man who has seen many fighters come and go. His calmness comes not from softness but from certainty. He knows what this life demands, and he expects every man here to understand it too. The warm-up begins the same way as always. They stretch, breathe deeply, and move through slow routines meant to wake every part of the body. The gladiator focuses on each breath. The cool morning air travels into his lungs and out again, steady and smooth. He has learned that calmness is part of strength. A fighter who lets nerves take over will grow tense, slow, and careless. After stretching, they jog around the yard. Their feet press into the sand, leaving shallow prints. The sound of their steps blends into a soft, steady rhythm that grows stronger as more men join. The sun rises gradually, casting a warm glow across the top of the walls. Shadows shrink. The day begins to take shape. Once warm, ups are complete. Wooden shields and training swords are handed out. The weapons feel lighter than real ones, but they still require strength to control. These drills are not about power. They are about discipline. The gladiator stands in front of a wooden post and repeats strikes. Forward step. Downward side block. Thrust. Reset. Over and over. His arms begin to burn, but he keeps his movements sharp and fluid. The trainer watches carefully, correcting those who fall out of form. A man on the end is too slow with his guard. The trainer taps his shield to remind him to keep it raised. Another man swings too wide, wasting energy. The trainer corrects him too. The gladiator, trained for years now, receives fewer corrections, but he never feels relaxed. He knows eyes are always on him. Hours pass like this, disciplined and repetitive. Yet within the repetition, every man sharpens his instincts, his reactions, his endurance. The gladiator does not know when his next match will be, but he knows it will come. They always come. By midday, the sun bakes the sand into a warm, shifting surface. The heat clings to their skin. Sweat drips from their brows and runs down their backs. They pause only when the trainer calls them for lunch. The food is simple, but it fills the stomach enough to give strength. Bread, dried figs, and barley mash form the usual meal. The gladiator sits in the shade of the wall with two men he has known for years. One is tall and quiet, the other shorter and often smiling. Even in a place like this, human bonds form. Shared struggle brings men closer, though they rarely speak deeply. They simply exist side by side, like working hands of the same body. After lunch, the harder training begins. This part of the day is reserved for weapon specialization. Gladiators are not all trained the same. Each man is shaped into a type of fighter. The gladiator we follow is trained as a secutor, a heavy, shield fighter built to face a retiarius, a net and trident man. His helmet is smooth and rounded, designed to resist the hooking strikes of a trident. His shield is large, built for endurance. His sword is short, meant for close, urgent combat. Today they practice forms specific to this role. He moves with a partner who plays the role of the retiarius, though using wooden versions of the real weapons. The net is lighter, less dangerous, but still forces the secutor to react quickly. The gladiator practices turning away from the net sweep, covering vital areas with his shield, and rushing forward to close the distance before the imagined trident can strike. These drills demand precision. A moment too slow, a step too wide, and he could be caught. Even though the weapons here cannot kill, the training is intense. The purpose is to prepare them for real combat, where hesitation means defeat. Late afternoon arrives, and training shifts again. This time, they work on controlled sparring. The trainer chooses pairs. Each pair enters the sand circle, while others watch, rest, or wait for their turn. When the gladiator's name is called, he steps into the circle with a man he has trained beside for years. The two of them know each other's movements well. Their sparring feels like a slow conversation. Each strike is answered. Each block is anticipated. They move with discipline, not aggression. There is no crowd here, no cheers pushing them forward. Just the soft sound of wood, touching wood, sand shifting beneath their feet, and the faint breath of men holding focus. Their trainer watches closely, correcting posture and footwork. The purpose is not to win the spar, but to sharpen skills. When the final spar of the day ends, the men are drenched in sweat. Their bodies tremble with exhaustion, but there is also a sense of quiet pride. They know they have done what was required of them. The trainer releases them. They walk slowly toward the bathhouse, a place that feels almost sacred after a day of strain. The bathhouse is warm, filled with steam that rises from the heated pools. This ritual of washing is one of the few comforts the gladiators enjoy. The warm water eases pain. The steam softens tense muscles. The sound of water echoing against stone brings a rare sense of calm. The gladiator slips into the warm pool, letting his body sink until the water reaches his shoulders. His muscles sigh with relief. Around him, other men talk in low voices, sharing comments about the day's drills or laughing about small mistakes they made. The steam blurs the edges of the room, making everything feel softer. After washing, the men return to their quarters. Evening meals are served. The food is modest, but they eat gratefully. Hunger is a constant companion in this life, and a full stomach is a blessing. Night comes again. The hum of distant Rome stretches over the city. The Ludus grows quiet, lit only by small oil lamps. The gladiator lies on his bunk, listening to the soft breathing of the others. His eyes close slowly. He knows tomorrow will be much like today, and the next day will follow the same rhythm. But he has also learned that this rhythm keeps him alive. It prepares him for the moments when the arena gate opens and the world becomes loud, bright, and sharp. He breathes slowly, feeling the weight of sleep settle over him. His heart beats a little faster when he thinks about the arena. Even the strongest fighters feel fear. But he also feels determination. As long as he keeps training, keeps learning, and keeps surviving, he moves one step closer to something better. Morning arrives once more. He rises again. Training begins again. The cycle continues. Today, though, something feels slightly different. There is a faint tension in the air. The trainer's voice is calm, but the way he watches the men suggests news has arrived. After warm-ups, he gathers them together and announces that a small group has been chosen for an upcoming set of games. The arena magistrate has requested fighters, and several men from this Ludus must be ready. The gladiator feels his stomach tighten. He has been in the arena before, but the fear never leaves. Still, he stands steady as the names are called. When his name echoes in the yard, he gives no reaction, not wanting to show either fear or excitement. Gladiators learn early that their expressions give too much away. Those chosen will train differently in the coming days. Their routines intensify, focusing on the specific matchups arranged for the games. A man scheduled to face a Retiarius must polish the skills of a secutor. A man set against a Murmillo must prepare for heavier shield strikes. Everything becomes sharper, more focused, more urgent. The gladiator begins this new training with serious attention. The trainer guides him through advanced forms, pushing him harder than usual. The wooden sword feels heavier today. The shield strains his arm. His muscles ache sooner, but he does not stop. He cannot. Each improvement increases his chance of walking out of the arena gates once the sand settles. Days pass quickly. The tension grows. Conversations among the chosen fighters become softer, shorter. Thoughts drift toward the future, toward the sand, the crowd, the moment when fate will test them. When the morning of departure arrives, the sky is grey. Clouds hang low overhead, casting a cool shade across the training yard. The chosen fighters gather near the entrance gates of the Ludus, where guards and trainers stand ready. Wagons will take them to the arena. Not the great Colosseum this time, but a smaller stadium farther across the city. The gladiator stands with the group. He feels the familiar knot of worry in his stomach, but also a strange calmness. Training has shaped him for this moment. There is no turning back. They climb into the wagons. The wheels creak as they roll through the streets of Rome. The city is awake now, full of merchants calling out prices, citizens chatting, children weaving through crowds. The fighters sit quietly, each lost in thought. At last, the arena comes into view. It is smaller than the great Colosseum, but still large enough to hold thousands of people. Inside, the sand is freshly raked. Workers prepare props, weapons, and decorative elements. The noise of the gathering crowd rises like a distant tide. The gladiator steps off the wagon and follows the others into the preparation area beneath the arena. Here, the air is cool and shaded. Weapons are checked, armor prepared, and final instructions given. The gladiator sits on a bench, breathing slowly, sharpening his focus. When a guard walks by with the helmet he will wear, he lifts it carefully. Its surface is smooth and rounded, with only small eye holes for sight. Once he puts it on, the world will become narrow and hot. He looks at the helmet for a moment before placing it beside him. Then he rests his hands on his knees and closes his eyes. He pictures the sand. He pictures his opponent. He reminds himself of his steps, his strikes, his blocks. He reminds himself that panic is the enemy. He waits. The crowd above grows louder. Voices blend, rising and falling in waves. Finally, a guard steps close and calls his name. It is time. He lifts his helmet. He places it over his head. The world darkens slightly, becomes muffled. His breath echoes inside the metal. His vision narrows to a small strip of light. He stands. He takes his shield. He walks toward the gate. The wooden door slides open, and bright sunlight floods his eyes. The heat rushes toward him. The sand stretches out before him. The crowd roars. He steps forward. His opponent waits on the other side of the arena, holding the net loosely in one hand and the trident in the other. The Ricciarius is quick, lean, and built for distance. The gladiator knows the fight will depend on how well he can close the gap. He moves carefully, testing the sand under his feet, watching every shift of his opponent's weight. The announcer raises his voice. The crowd quiets for a moment. Then the match begins. The Ricciarius moves first, swinging the net outward in a wide arc. The gladiator raises his shield and steps back, letting the net fall short. He watches for the trident, aware it could strike at any second. The Ricciarius circles to the side, searching for an angle. The gladiator moves with him, shield raised, sword ready. The net sweeps again, closer this time. The gladiator ducks behind his shield, stepping forward to disrupt the swing. The trident thrusts toward him. He feels the impact on his shield, strong enough to push him back a step. The crowd reacts with a burst of excitement. He steadies himself and advances. He must get closer. The Ricciarius steps back, trying to maintain distance, but the gladiator pushes forward, shield first, forcing the pace. The trident thrusts again, this time at his leg. He blocks with the lower edge of his shield and moves in. The fight continues like this, a slow and dangerous dance. The gladiator breathes heavily inside the helmet. Sweat runs down his face. The crowd roars with every exchange. Finally, the moment comes. The Ricciarius missteps, planting his foot too deeply into the sand. His balance falters. His swing of the trident widens just a little too much. The gladiator sees the opening. He charges forward, shield up, sword ready, driving straight into the vulnerable space. He blocks the trident with his shield, pins the net under his foot, and strikes. The blow lands. The Ricciarius falls. The match ends. The crowd erupts in cheers. The gladiator stands over his opponent, chest rising and falling fast. He waits for the order from the magistrate, the signal that decides the fate of the defeated man. The silence stretches. Then the decision is given. Sparring gesture. The Ricciarius will live. Relief washes through the gladiator's chest. He steps back as attendants rush in to help the defeated man. The arena gate opens. The gladiator walks toward it, breath still uneven, vision still dimmed from the helmet. But he is alive. He has survived. And that means he will return to the Ludus tonight. He will train again tomorrow. The cycle continues. The wagon ride back to the Ludus is quieter than the ride out. The gladiator sits with his hands resting on his knees, feeling the dull ache that settles into his muscles now that the rush of the arena has faded. His arms tremble slightly from the effort of holding the shield for so long. His legs feel heavy from the sudden bursts of movement. Inside the helmet, he had felt like he was breathing fire. Now, with the helmet resting beside him in the wagon, he can feel the warm breeze against his skin again. It feels soothing, almost soft. Around him, the other fighters from the same event sit in different states of emotion. One man smiles faintly, relieved to be alive. Another stares at the floor of the wagon with distant eyes, perhaps remembering the moment he nearly fell. One of the younger gladiators trembles quietly. It was his first time in the arena. The experience leaves a mark that no amount of training can fully prepare someone for. The gladiator feels a sense of quiet sympathy for him. Every man here knows the weight of that first true fight. The wagon rolls through the streets, past merchants shouting about fresh fruit, past children who run beside the wagon for a few steps before darting away again, past old women carrying baskets. To these people, the gladiators in the wagon are something strange and distant. Some admire them. Others fear them. Some barely pay attention at all. Life in Rome is too busy to pause long. When the wagon arrives at the Ludus, the gates open slowly. The men step down from the wagon, and the trainer stands nearby, watching them with sharp eyes. He says nothing at first, only giving brief nods to those who return. A few attendants hurry forward to store the weapons and armor, checking for damage that must be repaired before the next event. The gladiator hands off his shield, then holds out the helmet. Its metal surface is still warm. The attendant bows his head slightly and carries it away for cleaning. The trainer finally speaks. His voice is steady, not warm but not harsh. He notes the performance of each fighter, offering small comments or reminders. When he speaks to the gladiator, he simply says that the steps were steady, the shield works strong, but the breathing under the helmet must remain calmer. The gladiator nods. He respects the trainer's eye. Even praise is given sparingly here, and in this life, survival itself is a quiet victory. The men walk toward the bathhouse, and the gladiator's tired body welcomes the thought of warm water. As they undress and step into the steam, the heat feels like a blanket settling over him. Muscles loosen, stiffness softens. The air is thick with warmth, and for a moment, time feels slow. The younger fighter who trembled earlier sits nearby, his hands still shaking slightly. An older gladiator pats him on the arm and tells him in a low voice that the shaking will pass. The first fight always brings a storm, and storms settle with time. The gladiator closes his eyes, letting the warm water soak into his skin. He listens to the soft echoes of dripping water and the gentle murmurs of the others. It feels peaceful, almost like the world outside the Ludus has paused. Inside these walls, this simple comfort is one of the few things that remind him he is still human. After bathing, they dress in simple clothing and eat a modest evening meal. The oil lamps glow softly around the room, spreading dim light that dances on the walls. The gladiator sits with the same two men he often eats beside. The tall, quiet one offers a nod, as if to say he is glad for the safe return. The shorter, smiling one makes a small joke about the crowd, imitating the roar of the spectators in a playful way. A few men laugh, the sound warm and brief. Night settles over the Ludus. The gladiator returns to his bunk, easing himself onto it with a tired sigh. His body feels drained, but his mind is calmer now. He survived. He did what he had been trained to do. He closes his eyes and lets the darkness settle around him. The next morning arrives gently. The aches in his body are stronger, but expected. Arena day always leaves deeper marks than training days. When he stands, he feels a tight pull along his ribs where the trident had pressed into his shield. He rotates his shoulders slowly, loosening the stiffness. Around him, the others do the same. Some groan softly as they stretch. Others move silently through the pain. Training today will be lighter. The trainer always gives the fighters who returned from the arena a slower morning. The body needs time to recover. Still, there is no true rest. He begins the day with slow walking drills, working on foot patterns across the sand. The movements are gentle, but require full attention. Even on a tired day, discipline must remain. After the drills, the trainer gathers the men and speaks about technique. He explains what he saw in the arena, not just from each gladiator, but from the crowd's reaction. The crowds of Rome play a strange role in the life of a fighter. Their cheers can lift a man, push him forward, give him strength, but they can also demand danger, drama, and spectacle. The trainer reminds the men that they must fight with skill, not with reckless movements meant only to please spectators. Staying alive is the first goal. The gladiator listens quietly. He respects these talks. They remind him that even though his life is controlled by others, he still holds some power through his skill and preparation. As the day moves on, the routine settles back into normal rhythm. By midday, the soreness begins to fade. In the afternoon, they work on shield drills, moving in pairs and practicing defensive stances. The gladiator feels his strength returning little by little. Each movement helps his body remember its patterns. The Ludus is a place shaped by repetition. Training is the rhythm that holds everything together. Without it, fear would take over. But with it, men learn to breathe through danger, to move without thinking, to face whatever waits for them with calm strength. Days pass like this, blending into one another. Warm mornings, harsh training, quiet meals, nights of rest. The gladiator grows more settled again, falling back into his steady routine. The memory of the arena fades slightly, though it never disappears completely. Every fight leaves an imprint. One afternoon, the trainer introduces a new group of recruits. They arrive through the gates looking uncertain, nervous, and overwhelmed by the sight of the training yard. Some are prisoners taken in distant lands. Some are debtors sold into servitude. A few may have volunteered, seeking glory or wealth. Whatever the reason, they now stand in the same sand that shapes every man here. The trainer instructs the older gladiators to guide the newcomers through basic steps. The gladiator is paired with one of them, a younger man who looks barely old enough to fight. His hands shake when he holds the wooden sword. His stance is too wide, then too narrow, but he tries, and trying is the first step toward surviving. The gladiator shows him how to hold the sword properly. He corrects his feet, adjusts his shoulders, and demonstrates a simple block. The young man watches carefully, trying to imitate each movement. It will take months for him to grow strong enough, but everyone here once stood where he stands. As the day ends, the gladiator feels a strange mix of exhaustion and steadiness. Helping the younger fighters reminds him of how far he has come. In this place, experience is earned through strain and fear, through quiet mornings and endless drills. Night comes again. The lamps flicker. The beds creak softly as the men settle in. The gladiator lies down and listens to the familiar sounds around him. Despite the hardships, there is a small comfort in knowing his place, his purpose, and his path through each day. Weeks pass. Training continues. The weather begins to shift. Cooler mornings replace the heavy heat. The gladiator breathes in the crisp air and feels refreshed by it. He knows that another round of games will come soon. They always do. Rome hungers for spectacle. The people crave stories told through combat, and gladiators are the ones who must step into the sand to give those stories shape. One morning, as the sun rises slowly over the rooftops, the trainer gathers the men again. He has news. Another event is approaching, and this time it will be held in a larger arena. Not the Colosseum, but close to it in grandeur. The fighters chosen for this set of games will need to prepare with greater intensity. This will be a crowded show with many spectators, many fighters, and many eyes watching. The gladiator listens, feeling the familiar tightening in his stomach. When his name is called among those chosen, he nods once and steps back into the line. The next days will be harder. He must be ready. Training intensifies. Mornings stretch longer. Afternoon drills become sharper and more urgent. The gladiator trains with heavy shields, practicing quick turns and strong forward pushes. He learns the specific style of the opponent he will face, studying the patterns of that type of fighter. A murmillo this time known for heavier armor and strong downward strikes. He practices blocking those strikes, absorbing the force on his shield, and countering with fast cuts to the side. The sun beats down on the yard, but he barely notices. His focus tightens each day. At night, he lies awake for a few moments before sleep, thinking through the steps. Fight patterns, shield angles, footwork, breathing. The more he imagines the match, the calmer he becomes. Preparation quiets fear. The day before the event arrives, and the trainer gives the chosen fighters a light afternoon. They eat well, drink plenty of water, and rest. The gladiator sits outside for a while, watching the sky shift into soft colors as the sun sets. Rome glows in the distance, full of life and noise. Inside these walls, the world is quieter, but the tension of tomorrow lingers in the air. He steps into the dormitory and settles onto his bunk. The room feels still, as if holding its breath. He closes his eyes and lets sleep take him. Morning arrives. The fighters gather near the gates. Wagons wait outside, horses stamping the hooves against the stone road. The trainer walks down the line, giving each man a steady look. He reminds them to keep their minds sharp, to trust their training, and to stay calm. The gladiator climbs into the wagon. The ride feels long, though the distance is not great. When the arena appears, its size and shape stand tall against the sky. Thousands of seats rise around it, waiting to be filled. Workers prepare the sand, raking it smooth. Others carry weapons, armor, and decorations. The air is thick with anticipation. Inside the preparation area, the gladiator sits quietly, hands resting on his thighs. His helmet is polished. His shield is checked. His sword is sharpened. He listens to the muffled sound of the gathering crowd above. His breathing stays steady. The nerves settle into something calm and controlled. The match list is read. He will fight second. He closes his eyes for a moment and focuses. When his turn comes, he stands with slow, solid steps. He places his helmet over his head. The world narrows again. He takes his shield, his sword. The weight of everything settles into his arms. The gate opens. Sunlight floods his vision. The crowd roars like a wave crashing against stone. He steps into the sand. His opponent waits opposite him, helmet gleaming, shield broad, sword ready. A Mamilo, built for strength, built for endurance, built to withstand heavy blows. The crowd quiets slightly. Then the signal is given. The Mamilo advances. His shield rises, sword angled forward. The gladiator steps lightly to the side, watching for the downward strike he knows will come. When it does, he blocks with the upper edge of his shield, feeling the impact vibrate through his arm. They circle each other, shields brushing against sand, boots pushing small tracks into the ground. Block, step, counter. The rhythm grows faster. The Mamilo presses forward with heavy steps, trying to overpower. The gladiator shifts his weight, redirecting the blows, searching for an opening. Their shields collide. Sand scatters beneath their feet. The crowd shouts with every clash. Finally, the opening appears. A moment, a breath. The Mamilo raises his shield too high, just for a second, preparing for another downward strike. The gladiator moves. He steps in close, shield angled, sword sliding low. The strike lands. The Mamilo stumbles. The crowd rises. The match ends. The decision is given. Mercy again. Relief washes through him. He steps back, chest rising and falling, and walks toward the open gate. Another fight survived. Another day earned. Another sunrise promised. The wagon ride back from the larger arena is quiet, almost unnaturally so, as if every man senses that the truth of this life lies not in the cheers, but in the exhaustion that follows them. The gladiator sits with his shield resting against his leg, feeling the dull pulses of ache travelling up his arm. His ribs throb where the heavy downward strike landed earlier. Even though his block absorbed most of the force, the impact left a bruise beneath the skin, a deep ache that will stay for days. Hardship is part of this life. It is not only the danger of the arena, but also the strain of training, the cold mornings, the punishing afternoons, the aching nights when sleep comes slowly because muscles will not loosen. Many men who live outside the Ludus imagine gladiators as fearless warriors, strong and proud, walking boldly into battle. But inside the Ludus, every man knows that fear and pain are constant companions. Strength is shaped by hardship, but hardship is often heavier than strength. As the wagon creaks toward the school, the gladiator glances at the younger fighters. Some stare downward, lost in their thoughts. Some breathe slowly with eyes closed, trying to calm the trembling in their hands. A few look outward, watching the city streets blur by, perhaps thinking of home or of a life they once lived. In these quiet moments after the arena, a strange bond grows between the fighters. They may not always speak deeply, but they share an understanding no outsider can fully grasp. They reach the Ludus gates. The doors open. The trainer stands waiting, arms folded, eyes sharp. He studies the returning fighters, noting every bruise, every limp, every sign of strain. In this place, the trainer is more than an instructor. He is judge, guardian, strategist, and sometimes the only figure who helps the men survive another day. His approval is rare, but when he gives a short nod of acknowledgement, it means everything. The fighters move toward the bathhouse again. The gladiator steps into the warm water, feeling the heat wrap around his tired body. He sinks deeper, letting the warmth soak into his joints. The bathhouse is always a place of honesty. Here, the men speak more quietly, more openly. They talk about the strikes that surprised them, the moments when breath was knocked from their lungs, the fear they felt when the crowd roared and they had to think through the noise. Some men laugh softly. Laughter in the bathhouse is not joy. It is relief. Relief to be alive. relief to have avoided a fatal wound, relief to sit in warm water instead of lying in the sand with the crowd shouting for a decision. After bathing, they dress in clean clothing and move toward the dining room. The meal tonight is simple, as always, but large enough to fill their bellies. Modern people often imagine gladiators feeding on meat and luxurious meals, but the reality was different. Most gladiators ate a diet heavy with barley, oats, beans, and dried fruit. Only occasionally did they receive meat. Their diet built strong, heavy bodies, more suited to enduring blows than delivering them. They were not lean warriors, but thick, solid fighters who could absorb impact. The gladiator sits down at the long wooden table. Bread is passed around. Bowls of barley porridge are served. A few olives accompany the meal. He eats slowly, letting the food settle. Hunger feels sharper after the arena, as if the body knows it narrowly escaped danger and now demands to be nourished. Around him, the men speak in low voices. Some discuss the fights of the day. Others talk about minor things, memories from their homes, small jokes from training, guesses about when the next event will come. Even these small conversations help the men feel grounded in a life that often seems shaped by forces beyond their control. The oil lamps flicker along the walls, spreading soft yellow light. Shadows move gently, making the room feel warmer and calmer than it truly is. After eating, the men drift toward their sleeping quarters, walking slowly, stretching their sore limbs. The gladiator lies down on his bunk again, closing his eyes. Sleep comes more easily tonight because exhaustion weighs down his body. The Aches will return tomorrow, but for now, the darkness is comforting. The next morning arrives with a chill in the air. The gladiator wakes before dawn, stretching his arms and rolling his shoulders to ease the stiffness. The arena fights are over for now, but life in the Ludus does not slow. Training continues because there is no guarantee how long the break will last before another magistrate demands fighters. When he steps into the training yard, he notices the clouds overhead. A soft mist hangs in the air. The sand is cool beneath his feet. The morning warm-up feels slightly harder because his muscles are still recovering, but he pushes through. Every man here learns early that the body grows stronger not by avoiding hardship, but by working steadily through it. The trainer divides the fighters into groups. Some work with wooden swords. Others practice shield footwork. A few practice falling drills, learning how to hit the ground safely. Falling in the arena can be fatal if done poorly. A man who falls wrong may drop his shield, expose his back, or lose his weapon. So the trainer forces them to fall dozens of times each day, forward, backward, sideways, until their bodies understand the movement without thinking. The gladiator drops to the sand, rolling with his shield close to his body, then rises smoothly to his feet. He repeats the motion again and again. Sand clings to his arms. His back aches from the sudden impacts, but he keeps going. The trainer watches closely, correcting him when he rises too slowly or shifts his weight incorrectly. After falling drills, they move to weapon practice. The gladiator trains with a blunted sword, working through forms slowly at first, then faster. Sweat builds on his brow even in the cool morning air. His breath grows heavier. His arms burn with effort. But each step, each cut, each block builds precision. The trainer walks behind the men, observing their movements. He stops beside the gladiator, watching him strike at a wooden post. For a moment, he says nothing. Then he comments on the angle of the sword. The gladiator adjusts slightly and continues. Small corrections matter here. They shape survival. By midday, the clouds lift and the sun returns. The heat grows again, turning the sand warm underfoot. The fighters gather for lunch. The meal is similar to the day before. Bread, olives, barley mash. But this time a small serving of cooked vegetables accompanies it. Fresh vegetables are rare in the Ludus, reserved for days when a successful arena performance earns a few rewards. As the gladiator eats, he thinks about the nature of gladiator life. Hardship extends beyond physical pain. It includes the emotional weight of uncertainty. A fighter never knows how long he will live never knows when his next fight will be, never knows whether a small mistake will end his life. This constant uncertainty shapes the way gladiators view each day. They learn to value simple moments, warm water, quiet meals, peaceful nights, because these are the moments that keep them human. After lunch, the trainer calls them yard for paired drills. The gladiator faces a partner he trusts, a man who has trained beside him for years. Together, they practice slow combat sequences, moving in sync. The trainer emphasizes discipline, telling them that each movement should feel controlled. Fights in the arena may appear wild, but skilled fighters always move with intention. Chaos is often an illusion created for the crowd. The gladiator steps forward, shield raised, sword angled. His partner counters, stepping to the side. The sound of wood striking wood echoes across the yard. Sweat drips down their faces. Their breaths grow deeper. Each exchange pushes them closer to exhaustion, but each exchange also strengthens their instincts. By late afternoon, training ends for the day. The gladiator walks toward the shade, wiping sweat from his eyes. His skin feels warm. His legs feel heavy. But he also feels the satisfaction that comes from completing another day of training without injury. As evening arrives, he joins the others in the main room. They eat dinner, talk quietly, and rest. The trainer walks through the room, observing them with his usual steady expression. He reminds them that the next event may come soon, and they must remain prepared. Night settles in, lamps flicker. The gladiator lies down, closing his eyes. The world becomes dark again, and the sounds of the Ludus fade. Another week passes, then another. Training continues. Hardship continues. But so does strength. One morning, a messenger arrives at the Ludus, carrying a scroll sealed with a magistrate's mark. The trainer opens it, reads it slowly, and then gathers the men. Another event is scheduled. The crowd demands a larger show this time, one with multiple fights, many styles, and dramatic pairings. For the gladiators, this means days of intensified training. The gladiator listens as the match list is read. His name appears again. He nods. He feels the familiar tightening of nerves, but he has learned to control it. Fear is a companion now, not an enemy. Training grows harsher in the days that follow. The trainer increases the load of drills, adding more shield work, more conditioning, more weapon forms. He pushes the men until their breaths come sharp and fast. Some men vomit from exhaustion. Others collapse briefly before rising again. The trainer encourages them with firm commands, reminding them that the arena will be far harsher than any drill. Hardship in the Ludus is deliberate. It is meant to prepare the body and mind. A gladiator must be able to push through pain, through heat, through fear. The arena leaves no space for weakness. During these heavy training days, the gladiator's body aches constantly. His arms throb. His knees feel stiff. His hands develop blisters beneath old scars. But he keeps moving. Every man here knows that quitting is not an option. Strength is built slowly, painfully, through repetition. Even in hardship, there are small moments of humanity. In the evenings, some men sit together sharing stories. One speaks of a river from his homeland, describing the sound of its water. Another talks about the stars he used to see at night before coming to Rome. These small conversations remind the gladiator that each man around him once had a different life, shaped by different paths, different landscapes, different memories. Days pass. Then the morning of the event arrives again. The fighters gather near the gates. They board the wagons in silence. The gladiator grips the wooden seat, breathing slowly. He has learned to quiet his mind, to focus only on what he can control. The wagon rolls toward the arena. Gladiators mostly trained in large enclosed schools called Ludi, where their daily routines had been shaped by constant discipline and strict control. Their lives had been far more brutal and far more limited than many people imagined from stories or modern depictions. Some citizens believed gladiators had received glory and fame, but most fighters had lived with hardship, exhaustion, and fear as their closest companions. Training had filled nearly every hour of their days. Before sunrise, they had risen from simple wooden bunks, often still sore from the previous day's drills. Their bodies had rarely been free from bruises, strains, or deep aches. The sand of the training yard had been cold in the morning and scorching hot in the afternoon, yet the drills had continued without pause. They had practiced footwork for hours, repeating the same movements again and again until their legs felt heavy. Trainers had demanded perfect balance, steady breathing, and firm posture. Many recruits had arrived in poor condition, and the constant drills had broken down their weaknesses quickly. Without proper control of their stance, a fighter had stood little chance of surviving an actual match. Because of this, the trainer had pushed every man until he could move almost automatically. Weapons practice had been equally demanding. Gladiators had trained with wooden swords that weighed more than the real ones used in the arena. This heavier weight had built strength and endurance, but it had also left their arms burning with pain. The repeated impacts against wooden posts or training partners' shields had bruised their wrists and forearms. Over time, their hands had grown thick with calluses, and their joints had stiffened from years of strain. The hardest part of training had not been strength, but repetition. Gladiators had repeated the same movements thousands of times over the years. They had learned to step to the side instead of backward, to keep shields angled, to strike without overextending. Every mistake in the arena had held the possibility of death, and so the trainer had demanded that the men drill until their muscles remembered every motion better than their minds did. Many people in Rome had assumed gladiators received luxury or special treatment because crowds cheered for them. But in reality, most gladiators had lived in controlled environments. They had eaten simple meals heavy in barley, beans, and oats. Their diet had made them strong and heavy, giving their bodies mass to absorb blows. Meat had been uncommon, and sweets had been rare. The meals had not been meant for pleasure. They had been designed for survival. Sleeping quarters had been cramped. Some ludi had housed dozens of fighters in a single room. Others had used small cells with barred doors. Privacy had been almost non-existent. The smell of sweat, oil, and dust had filled the air at all times. Some fighters had kept personal tokens or small objects from their past lives, but most had lost such belongings long before. Fear had followed them every day. Even during quiet moments, the knowledge of future matches had lingered in their thoughts. Gladiators had known they might be called to fight with little warning. They had known that a wrong step or moment of hesitation could mean fatal injury. Although some fighters had been skilled enough to survive several years, many had died early in their training or during their first few matches. Yet gladiators had also built strong bonds with one another. Living together, training together, and facing constant danger had created a sense of brotherhood. They had spoken quietly in the bathhouse after long days, sharing advice or comforting one another after difficult matches. These moments had softened the harshness of their lives. Within the walls of the Ludus, the fighters had often been the only people who understood one another's fears and struggles. The punishments in the Ludus had been severe. A gladiator who disobeyed orders, skipped drills, or behaved badly could be chained, beaten, or starved. Training had been strict because the trainer had been responsible for keeping the men alive in the arena. Harsh discipline had been viewed as necessary rather than cruel. Still, many gladiators had hated the lack of control in their lives. For fighters who had entered the Ludus as prisoners of war or slaves, the adjustment had been especially painful. They had been taken from their homes and forced into an existence shaped by violence. Some had adapted and become skilled fighters. Others had struggled with the emotional burden of losing their freedom. Many people believed gladiators had earned great prizes. Some did. Rarely. Skilled fighters who had survived multiple matches occasionally received gifts, money, or special treatment from wealthy patrons. But for most gladiators, rewards had been small and infrequent. Victory in the arena had not guaranteed freedom or wealth. It had only guaranteed another day of life and another day of training. The emotional strain had been immense. Gladiators had lived knowing the public viewed them as entertainment. The crowd had cheered when a man bled, roared when a fighter stumbled, and demanded dramatic finishes. For the fighters, the arena had been a place of fear. For the spectators, it had been a place of leisure. Some gladiators had been admired by the public, and a few had even become popular figures. But admiration had not removed the chains of the Ludus or the pain of the arena. Fame had not eased the burden of constant training or healed the wounds from battle. Even outside the arena, their lives had remained tightly controlled. They could not freely walk through the city. They could not choose their work or travel. They existed in a strange and painful position, famous to the crowd, but powerless in their daily lives. The brutality of their world had extended far beyond physical suffering. The constant uncertainty, the loss of freedom, the repetition of violence, and the knowledge that years of training could end in a single moment had weighed heavily on their minds. Many fighters had carried quiet sorrow within them, hidden beneath the strong physical shell they had built. And though their lives had been difficult, their discipline and resilience had been remarkable. Through the harsh conditions, they had developed incredible skill, courage, and endurance. They had lived within one of the most demanding and unforgiving systems of the ancient world. Yet many had kept their humanity, supporting one another and finding small moments of peace where they could. Gladiators had lived under constant supervision, and every part of their day had been shaped by rules that came from the trainer or the owner of the Ludus. Their world had been built on discipline, repetition, and the understanding that they belonged to a system designed not for their comfort, but for the entertainment of Rome's citizens. Even on quiet days, when no events had been scheduled, the fighters had known their time did not truly belong to them. The Ludus itself had been an enclosed environment, often surrounded by high walls. These walls had served two purposes. They had kept fighters inside, and they had kept the outside world away. The separation had been both physical and emotional. Men could hear the noise of the city beyond the walls, yet the everyday life of ordinary Romans had remained distant and unreachable. Gladiators had rarely been allowed to walk freely in public, and even when they had been escorted outside festivals or parades, they had moved under the watchful eye of guards. Inside the training grounds, the day had begun before the sun fully rose. A horn or the trainer's shout had woken the men from restless sleep. Many fighters had slept poorly because their bodies had ached from the strain of previous days. Some had suffered nightmares about injuries, lost comrades, or the roar of the arena crowd. But when morning came, they had risen without question. Refusal had not been permitted. Early morning warm-ups had been slow but demanding. Fighters had moved through stretches, footwork patterns, and breathing exercises. The trainer had believed that a controlled mind required a controlled body, so he insisted that every man practiced techniques calmly and precisely before the harder drills began. The cool air of dawn had often stung their skin, and the sand beneath their feet had felt cold. But these sensations had been a normal part of their routine. After warm-up exercises, the real work had begun. Gladiators had trained for hours in weapon technique. Depending on their assigned fighting style, they had used wooden swords, heavy shields, long spears, nets, tridents, curved blades, or protective armor that resembled the equipment used in the arena. The training weapons had been heavier than the real ones. This had ensured that when the time came to fight publicly, the real equipment felt lighter and easier to control. Some fighters had specialized roles. The Murmillo had carried a large shield and a short sword. The Ricciarius had fought with a net and trident, relying on speed rather than armor. The Secutor had worn a smooth helmet designed to prevent the Ricciarius from hooking it with a net. The Thrakes had carried a curved blade and a smaller shield. Each style had required specific training methods, and each had emphasized different strengths. Although each style had been unique, the brutality of training had been universal. Sweat had soaked into the sand until the ground felt muddy beneath their feet. The trainer had walked among them constantly, watching every motion. His commands had been sharp and short. When a fighter made a mistake, he had been corrected at once. Sometimes the corrections had come in the form of verbal instruction. Other times, the trainer had used a staff to strike the shield or leg of a fighter, forcing him into the proper stance. Men had collapsed during training. The heat of Rome, especially in the summer, had taken a heavy toll. The sun had burned their skin, and some fighters had suffered heat exhaustion. The trainer had allowed brief moments of rest, but only long enough to prevent collapse. The expectation had been that a gladiator could fight under the harshest conditions. Any sign of weakness had been viewed as a threat to survival. The emotional strain of this environment had been just as intense as the physical strain. Gladiators had known they had no control over their schedules or their fates. They had not known when their next match would be scheduled, who they would face, or how difficult the battle would be. This uncertainty had created a steady pressure that rested in the minds of every fighter. Some men had learned to hide their fear well, speaking calmly with others, moving through their routines, and pretending they felt nothing. But inside, fear had been constant, and even the most experienced warriors had carried it quietly each day. At midday, training had briefly stopped for meals. Food had been simple but heavy. Barley porridge had been the main dish for most meals, often served with beans, dried fruit, or vegetables. Meat had been given occasionally, especially after a successful fight, or when the trainer believed a man needed extra strength. Gladiators had been encouraged to eat large amounts. Their bodies required high energy to survive their brutal routines. Yet despite eating often, many fighters had felt hungry shortly after meals. Training had burned more energy than their food could easily replace. After eating, the men had returned to the yard for more drills. Afternoon training had focused on sparring. Fighters with similar styles had been paired together to practice speed, angles, and timing. They had worn padded protection, but injuries had still been common. Bruised ribs, swollen wrists, cut forearms, and twisted ankles had been part of daily life. The healer of the Ludus had worked constantly, tending to wounds that rarely had time to heal. As the sun began to lower, training eventually ended. Fighters had been exhausted, their breath heavy, their bodies trembling. They had walked slowly toward the bathhouse, where warm water provided temporary relief. The bathhouse had been one of the few places where gladiators could relax even slightly. In the warm steam, their tense muscles had loosened. Some men had talked quietly with one another. Others had simply rested in silence. Evenings had been calmer, though still structured. After bathing, the gladiators had eaten dinner together. The food had often been similar to lunch: barley, beans, bread, and vegetables. Some men had shared stories from earlier in their lives. Others had kept to themselves, too tired or too troubled to speak. These meals had not been joyful, but they had provided a sense of companionship. In the harsh world of the Ludus, companionship had been one of the few comforts the fighters had known. After dinner, fighters had returned to their sleeping quarters. The rooms had been crowded, the air heavy with heat and the smell of sweat. Some men had fallen asleep quickly, too exhausted to think. Others had struggled to rest, lying awake in the darkness, thinking about past matches, upcoming battles, or the pain of their injuries. Nighttime had been a reminder of their vulnerability. Even in rest, they had felt the weight of the next day pressing toward them. Life outside the arena had been filled with hardship, but the arena itself had represented an even greater challenge. The public had viewed the games as entertainment, but for the gladiators, the arena had been a place of fear and danger. When they were led to the gates, their hearts had raced. They had known that the crowd would cheer at their suffering. They had known that the sand might become their grave. The pressure of facing thousands of spectators had been intense, especially when the crowd demanded dramatic action. Some fighters had survived many matches. They had gained respect from both the public and their fellow gladiators. But even successful fighters had lived with the knowledge that no amount of skill could guarantee survival. A single mistake, a missed block, a stumble, a moment of fatigue, could end years of training instantly. After a match, if a fighter had survived, he had been treated by the Ludus healer. Wounds had been cleaned with wine stitched roughly and bandaged with linen. Pain relief had been minimal. Gladiators had often fought with injuries still healing because long recovery times had not been considered practical. A fighter who could not train had been seen as a burden. Despite the brutality of their lives, friendships had developed within the Ludus. Fighters had supported one another during difficult times. They had trained together, suffered together, and survived together. This connection had provided a sense of family for many men who had lost their real families long before. Yet these friendships had also brought sorrow, because men frequently watched their companions fall in the arena. Some gladiators had gained freedom after years of service. The wooden sword called the rudis had been a symbol of release. Receiving the rudis had been rare, but when it happened, the entire Ludus had celebrated quietly. A freed gladiator had often remained connected to the school, serving as a trainer or advisor. Freedom had offered relief, but it had not erased the hardships they had endured. Others had never achieved freedom. Many had died young, their names forgotten except by those who had trained beside them. Their lives had been shaped by violence they had never chosen. The harsh reality of being a gladiator had shown that their world had been built on strength, endurance, and survival. They had lived under constant threat, trained under intense discipline, and fought for their lives before massive crowds who viewed them as objects of entertainment. Their lives had been difficult and often tragic, shaped more by suffering than by glory. Life inside the training school continued to unfold with a steady rhythm that rarely changed, and this rhythm shaped everything the fighters experienced. Gladiators mostly trained in strict cycles, and each cycle placed enormous pressure on their bodies and minds. Their lives had been built around labor, repetition, and survival rather than glory. The public often imagined victories, cheers, and prizes, but the reality inside those walls had been far colder. Every man in the Ludus had carried the weight of knowing he was living on borrowed time, even if his training kept him alive for a few years longer. The day usually began before dawn. Gladiators had woken to the sound of guards moving through the hallways or to the call of the trainer. The light outside had been faint and grey, and for a brief moment, the fighters had felt the chill of the early air cut through the stale heat of their sleeping quarters. Some men had stretched their sore muscles, while others had simply risen slowly, trying to prepare themselves for the long hours ahead. Talking had been minimal in the early morning. The weight of routine hung over them, and many men conserved their energy. After rising, the gladiators had moved to the training yard. The yard had been dusty, enclosed by high walls that blocked the view of the outside world. The fighters rarely saw anything beyond these walls, except on the days they were taken to the arena. It had been strange for many of them, knowing that life continued outside. Crowds, families, markets, festivals, while they remained locked in a world shaped entirely by combat. The first exercises of the day often involved warm-up routines that had been harsh on their bodies after long nights of limited sleep. They moved through drills that strengthened legs, shoulders, and core muscles. Wood blocks had been carried, sandbags lifted, and weighted poles held above their heads until their arms shook. These drills had not been designed to build heroic physiques, as later myths suggested. Instead, they prepared the men to hold heavy shields, maintain balance under extreme stress, and endure the long matches that could drain the life out of any fighter. Gladiators mostly trained with a discipline that bordered on punishment. The trainer, or lanista, had been responsible for turning ordinary men into fighters whose instincts could save them in the arena. He had not been gentle, Harsh corrections, loud commands, and swift punishment had been common. Many fighters had accepted the brutality as part of survival. Others had struggled, feeling the weight of fear each time the trainer approached with his cane or rope. The Lannister had often been a former gladiator himself, or at least a man who had spent many years around the games. His experience shaped his expectations. He had known every weakness that could cost a man his life. A hand held too high, a shield dropped a moment too soon, or a stance slightly off balance. Any flaw could turn into disaster when the crowd demanded violence. The trainer's strict methods had grown from his understanding of how quickly a life could end on the sand. Weapon drills formed the core of their day. Gladiators trained with heavy wooden versions of their weapons, sometimes twice as heavy as the metal ones they used in matches. This added weight strengthened them, but it also left their shoulders stiff and aching. Over time, the constant impact of wooden swords hitting shields or posts had built hardened muscles along their backs and arms. Many fighters walked with a slight heaviness, the result of thousands of hours spent striking, blocking, and absorbing force. Different types of gladiators trained separately. The Murmillo, for example, carried a large shield and heavy helmet, so his routines focused on endurance and stability. The Ricciarius, armed with a net and trident, trained in speed, footwork, and timing. Each type demanded unique skills, and the trainer had shaped each fighter into a specific tool for the games. Despite these differences, all gladiators shared the same physical exhaustion. Hours under the sun, whether hot or cold, drained their strength. Their skin had darkened from constant exposure, and their bodies had collected scars. Some shallow from training accidents, others deep from the arena. Each scar held a story, though most men did not speak about the matches that caused them. The memories often felt too close to death. After weapon drills, the fighters practiced mock duels. These duels had been intense and dangerous. Although they used wooden weapons, the force behind each swing had been real, and a poorly timed movement could lead to injury. Some gladiators broke bones in training rather than in the arena. A broken arm or leg often meant weeks of lost training, which weakened them further. Injured fighters were often pushed as soon as possible back into drills, even before fully recovering. The emotional toll of daily training weighed heavily on the men. Though they lived among dozens of other fighters, loneliness lingered in every corner of the Ludus. They had been separated from their old lives, families, homes, friendships, and forced into a world defined entirely by violence and discipline. Those who entered the school as slaves or prisoners often carried the deepest sorrow, knowing freedom lay far beyond their reach. Still, moments of humanity appeared even in harsh surroundings. Gladiators shared stories when the guards were not watching too closely. They offered advice to younger fighters, often teaching them subtle tricks about balance, breathing, and timing. Skills the trainer might overlook in his strict focus on technique. The older fighters had a sense of responsibility toward newcomers. They understood the danger better than anyone, and their quiet guidance sometimes made the difference between life and death. Meals had been simple. Contrary to popular belief, gladiators did not feast on rich foods or indulgent dishes. Their diets consisted of barley porridge, beans, dried fruit, and vegetables. This diet built mass and provided slow, burning energy, giving their bodies a thick layer of muscle and fat. This layer protected them from shallow cuts and absorbed glancing blows during fights. Meat was rare and usually reserved for special occasions or for fighters recovering from severe injuries. Some outsiders believed gladiators were pampered, fed well, and treated as prized athletes. But the truth had been more complex. Their bodies were valued, but their lives were owned. The food they received supported training, not comfort. Their care was practical rather than kind. A well-fed gladiator fought better, lasted longer, and brought more value to his owner. After their midday meal, training resumed. This second half of the day focused on fine control, strategy, breathing, and endurance. Fighters practiced slow movements, precision strikes, shield angles, and weapon transitions. The trainer corrected posture, adjusted foot placement, and controlled the pace of drills. Every detail mattered, because every detail could determine the outcome of a match. Life inside the Ludus felt repetitive, yet tension always lingered. At any moment, the trainer could announce that a fighter had been chosen for an upcoming match. Once chosen, the gladiator entered a period of intense preparation. Training became sharper, more focused, and more demanding. The fighter studied his opponent's fighting style, if known. He worked to sharpen strengths and cover weaknesses. Some men slept poorly in the days leading up to a match. Others forced themselves to rest, knowing exhaustion could be deadly. Fear shaped these days more deeply than anything. The fear of death, the fear of disappointing the trainer, the fear of failing in front of thousands of spectators who wanted entertainment rather than survival. A gladiator walked in a strange space between being valued for his skill and being disposable the moment he fell. Evenings in the Ludus were quiet compared to the noise of daytime. After the final drills, fighters cleaned their weapons, washed the sweat and dust from their bodies, and tended to small injuries. The bathhouse had been one of the few genuinely relieving places within the school. Warm water soothed their tired muscles, and for a short time, the men could relax. They spoke softly, as voices carried far in the stone chamber. Laughter sometimes echoed there, rare but cherished. Despite exhaustion, sleep often came slowly. Many men lay awake thinking about matches they had fought or matches that awaited them. Some feared dying far from home, never seeing their family again. Others feared the pain of injury more than death itself. A gladiator rarely escaped fear. He learned instead to live with it, carrying it quietly in his chest each day. And yet, despite everything, despite the harsh training, the strict discipline, the constant threat of death, gladiators formed bonds that were deep and resilient. They lived in a world where trust and support mattered more than glory. They relied on each other far more than on the crowds who cheered from the safety of the stands. This was the true world of the gladiator, not endless honor, not luxury, but struggle, fear, discipline, strength, and a fragile sense of brotherhood in a system built on violence. Life inside the training school continued to unfold with a steady rhythm that rarely changed, and this rhythm shaped everything the fighters experienced. Gladiators mostly trained in strict cycles, and each cycle placed enormous pressure on their bodies and minds. Their lives had been built around labor, repetition, and survival rather than glory. The public often imagined victories, cheers, and prizes, but the reality inside those walls had been far colder. Every man in the Ludus had carried the weight of knowing he was living on borrowed time, even if his training kept him alive for a few years longer. The day usually began before dawn. Gladiators had woken to the sound of guards moving through the hallways or to the call of the trainer. The light outside had been faint and grey, and for a brief moment, the fighters had felt the chill of the early air cut through the stale heat of their sleeping quarters. Some men had stretched their sore muscles, while others had simply risen slowly, trying to prepare themselves for the long hours ahead. Talking had been minimal in the early morning. The weight of routine hung over them, and many men conserved their energy. After rising, the gladiators had moved to the training yard. The yard had been dusty, enclosed by high walls that blocked the view of the outside world. The fighters rarely saw anything beyond these walls, except on the days they were taken to the arena. It had been strange for many of them, knowing that life continued outside. Crowds, families, markets, festivals, while they remained locked in a world shaped entirely by combat. The first exercises of the day often involved warm-up routines that had been harsh on their bodies after long nights of limited sleep. They moved through drills that strengthened legs, shoulders, and core muscles. Wood blocks had been carried, sandbags lifted, and weighted poles held above their heads until their arms shook. These drills had not been designed to build heroic physiques, as later myths suggested. Instead, they prepared the men to hold heavy shields, maintain balance under extreme stress, and endure the long matches that could drain the life out of any fighter. Gladiators mostly trained with a discipline that bordered on punishment. The trainer, or Lannister, had been responsible for turning ordinary men into fighters whose instincts could save them in the arena. He had not been gentle. Harsh corrections, loud commands, and swift punishment had been common. Many fighters had accepted the brutality as part of survival. Others had struggled, feeling the weight of fear each time the trainer approached with his cane or rope. The Lannister had often been a former gladiator himself, or at least a man who had spent many years around the games. His experience shaped his expectations. He had known every weakness that could cost a man his life. A hand held too high, a shield dropped a moment too soon, or a stance slightly off balance. Any flaw could turn into disaster when the crowd demanded violence. The trainer's strict methods had grown from his understanding of how quickly a life could end on the sand. Weapon drills formed the core of their day. Gladiators trained with heavy wooden versions of their weapons, sometimes twice as heavy as the metal ones they used in matches. This added weight strengthened them, but it also left their shoulders stiff and aching. Over time, the constant impact of wooden swords hitting shields or posts had built hardened muscles along their backs and arms. Many fighters walked with a slight heaviness, the result of thousands of hours spent striking, blocking, and absorbing force. Different types of gladiators trained separately. The Murmillo, for example, carried a large shield and heavy helmet, so his routines focused on endurance and stability. The Ricciarius, armed with a net and trident, trained in speed, footwork, and timing. Each type demanded unique skills, and the trainer had shaped each fighter into a specific tool for the games. Despite these differences, all gladiators shared the same physical exhaustion. Hours under the sun, whether hot or cold, drained their strength. Their skin had darkened from constant exposure, and their bodies had collected scars, some shallow from training accidents, others deep from the arena. Each scar held a story, though most men did not speak about the matches that caused them. The memories often felt too close to death. After weapon drills, the fighters practiced mock duels. These duels had been intense and dangerous. Although they used wooden weapons, the force behind each swing had been real, and a poorly timed movement could lead to injury. Some gladiators broke bones in training rather than in the arena. A broken arm or leg often meant weeks of lost training, which weakened them further. Injured fighters were often pushed as soon as possible back into drills, even before fully recovering. The emotional toll of daily training weighed heavily on the men. Though they lived among dozens of other fighters, loneliness lingered in every corner of the Ludus. They had been separated from their old lives, families, homes, friendships, and forced into a world defined entirely by violence and discipline. Those who entered the school as slaves or prisoners often carried the deepest sorrow, knowing freedom lay far beyond their reach. Still, moments of humanity appeared even in harsh surroundings. Gladiators shared stories when the guards were not watching too closely. They offered advice to younger fighters, often teaching them subtle tricks about balance, breathing, and timing, skills the trainer might overlook in his strict focus on technique. The older fighters had a sense of responsibility toward newcomers. They understood the danger better than anyone, and their quiet guidance sometimes made the difference between life and death. Meals had been simple. Contrary to popular belief, gladiators did not feast on rich foods or indulgent dishes. Their diets consisted of barley porridge, beans, dried fruit, and vegetables. This diet built mass and provided slow, burning energy, giving their bodies a thick layer of muscle and fat. This layer protected them from shallow cuts and absorbed glancing blows during fights. Meat was rare and usually reserved for special occasions or for fighters recovering from severe injuries. Some outsiders believed gladiators were pampered, fed well, and treated as prized athletes. But the truth had been more complex. Their bodies were valued. but their lives were owned. The food they received supported training, not comfort. Their care was practical rather than kind. A well-fed gladiator fought better, lasted longer, and brought more value to his owner. After their midday meal, training resumed. This second half of the day focused on fine control, strategy, breathing, and endurance. Fighters practiced slow movements, precision strikes, shield angles, and weapon transitions. The trainer corrected posture, adjusted foot placement, and controlled the pace of drills. Every detail mattered because every detail could determine the outcome of a match. Life inside the Ludus felt repetitive, yet tension always lingered. At any moment, the trainer could announce that a fighter had been chosen for an upcoming match. Once chosen, the gladiator entered a period of intense preparation. Training became sharper, more focused, and more demanding. The fighter studied his opponent's fighting style, if known. He worked to sharpen strengths and cover weaknesses. Some men slept poorly in the days leading up to a match. Others forced themselves to rest, knowing exhaustion could be deadly. Fear shaped these days more deeply than anything. The fear of death, the fear of disappointing the trainer, the fear of failing in front of thousands of spectators who wanted entertainment rather than survival. A gladiator walked in a strange space between being valued for his skill and being disposable the moment he fell. Evenings in the Ludus were quiet compared to the noise of daytime. After the final drills, fighters cleaned their weapons, washed the sweat and dust from their bodies, and tended to small injuries. The bathhouse had been one of the few genuinely relieving places within the school. Warm water soothed their tired muscles, and for a short time, the men could relax. They spoke softly, as voices carried far in the stone chamber. Laughter sometimes echoed there, rare but cherished. Despite exhaustion, sleep often came slowly. Many men lay awake thinking about matches they had fought or matches that awaited them. Some feared died far from home, never seeing their family again. Others feared the pain of injury more than death itself. A gladiator rarely escaped fear. He learned instead to live with it, carrying it quietly in his chest each day. And yet, despite everything, despite the harsh training, the strict discipline, the constant threat of death, gladiators formed bonds that were deep and resilient. They lived in a world where trust and support mattered more than glory. They relied on each other far more than on the crowds who cheered from the safety of the stands. This was the true world of the gladiator, not endless honor, not luxury, but struggle, fear, discipline, strength, and a fragile sense of brotherhood in a system built on violence. Life in the Ludus shaped the men not only through fear and discipline, but also through the constant awareness that everything they did had meaning only in relation to the arena. Every drill, every meal, and every hour of rest existed as preparation for public combat. This knowledge lingered in the background of their thoughts each day and influenced their behavior, even during quiet moments. The men often spoke softly about the arena without describing it directly. Many avoided reliving certain memories aloud because speaking about them brought the fear back into sharp focus. Silence served as a form of protection. Inside the walls of the school, the fighters carried themselves with a mix of caution and pride. They internalized the expectation that their bodies must always remain ready for combat. Injuries, though common, were treated as obstacles to overcome rather than reasons to rest. A man with a twisted ankle tried to walk normally so the trainer would not pull him from drills. Another with cracked ribs breathed slowly, steadying his chest to hide the pain. Their desire to appear strong came from necessity. A gladiator seen as weak risked losing his place, and in the world of the Ludus, losing status meant becoming more replaceable. The trainer understood this dynamic and enforced discipline without mercy. He believed that harshness taught resilience. He saw the fighters not as fragile individuals, but as instruments of spectacle. Yet even he held moments of quiet respect for the men under his control. When a fighter performed a technique with perfect precision, the trainer sometimes nodded subtly, acknowledging the skill. These rare gestures of approval mattered deeply to the men. They offered brief validation that their suffering had purpose. Although gladiators were often enslaved or forced into their roles, some volunteered. These volunteers entered the Ludus because they sought money, fame, or escape from debts. However, once inside, they faced the same strict conditions as everyone else. Their decision to join the ranks did not shield them from the brutality of training. In fact, volunteers sometimes faced suspicion from other fighters, who questioned why anyone would willingly choose such a life. Over time, though, shared hardship bonded them with the rest. The social world outside the Ludus viewed gladiators with a mixture of fascination, fear, and admiration. Many Romans respected the fighters for their courage and strength, yet they also considered them dishonorable because their profession involved bloodshed and servitude. A strange contradiction surrounded the gladiators. The public celebrated their victories, but avoided associating with them outside the arena. Gladiators lived at the edge of society, both admired and rejected at the same time. Despite this contradiction, some fighters gained notable popularity. Skilled warriors with repeated victories earned recognition, and crowds chanted their names during games. These men became symbols of strength and endurance, admired even by individuals who normally looked down on the gladiator class. But this fame did not free them from the control of their owners or trainers. Their daily life remained the same, tough, regulated, and dominated by preparation for the next fight. Gladiators understood that public admiration could shift quickly. A celebrated fighter could become forgotten after a single defeat or injury. The unpredictability of the games reminded them constantly that their status held no permanence. Even the most talented fighters lived with uncertainty. They hoped for survival and, if possible, for gradual improvement in their conditions, but they knew that luck determined much of their fate. The medical care available to gladiators offered a mixture of primitive knowledge and practical experience. Because the fighters were valuable assets, owners invested in individuals who understood how to treat wounds effectively. These healers had practical experience rather than formal training. They cleaned cuts and burns using wine, vinegar, or saltwater solutions to reduce infection. They stitched deep gashes with coarse thread and used poultices made from herbs to ease swelling. Bones were set with simple splints, and broken ribs were wrapped tightly to encourage healing. Recovery had been challenging because the fighters rarely received long rest periods. Even those with serious injuries were pushed back into training as soon as they could stand. This led many gladiators to develop lingering pain that lasted for years. Some walked with permanent limps or carried stiffness in their shoulders that never faded. Despite this, they continued to train because the alternative, appearing weak or refusing commands, risked punishment. Injuries in the arena could be far worse than those in training. Deep wounds, broken bones, or organ damage occurred frequently during matches. Fighters who survived these injuries endured long periods of recovery that tested their mental strength. Some lost mobility, others lost the ability to fight effectively. A gladiator who could no longer perform might be assigned minor tasks within the Ludus or sold to another owner for labor. The men dreaded such outcomes because they represented a type of slow rather than a heroic end. The rituals surrounding the games influenced the gladiators' emotional landscape. Before entering the arena, they gathered in holding cells beneath the amphitheater. These rooms were dim, lit by torches or sunlight filtering through grated openings. The sounds from above, the cheers of the crowd, the shuffling of animals, the clatter of weapons, floated downward. The fighters paced or sat silently, absorbed in their own thoughts. Some prayed to household gods or gods from their homelands. Others breathed slowly, using the techniques taught to them to calm their nerves. The moments before stepping onto the sand contained an intensity that shaped their memories for years. Even seasoned fighters felt their hearts pound heavily in their chests as they waited for the gates to open. Once inside the arena, the noise overwhelmed them. the stands filled with thousands of spectators, all eager for action. The sun poured down, heating their armor and drying their throats. Sand shifted beneath their feet, forcing them to adjust their stance. The atmosphere demanded their full attention. A gladiator who lost focus, even for a moment, risked taking a blow he could not survive. Despite the danger, the men performed with a level of discipline that impressed even their harshest critics. Years of training allowed them to maintain balance, anticipate movements, and react with speed. When two fighters clashed, their movements reflected countless hours of drilling. Shields angled perfectly, weapons struck with controlled force, and footwork kept them steady. Observers often focused on dramatic moments, but the real skill lay in the small adjustments that prevented mistakes. The crowd's reaction influenced the outcome of matches. When a fighter performed well, cheers erupted. When he stumbled, the roar changed in tone, carrying a sense of impatience or disappointment. A gladiator learned to read the crowd's mood instinctively, in some cases performing impressive techniques or showing courage in difficult situations earned mercy even in defeat. But nothing guaranteed survival. The sponsor of the games held authority over decisions, and his judgment could be unpredictable. After matches ended, the surviving fighters returned to the Ludus with a complicated mix of relief and exhaustion. Their bodies often shook from adrenaline. Their skin stung from cuts or bruises. They collapsed onto benches or the ground, catching their breath. The emotional weight of what had occurred often lingered long after the battle ended. Some fighters cried quietly, not from pain, but from the release of fear. Others stared at the walls, their minds blank, overwhelmed by the intensity of the experience. In the days following significant matches, the fighters rested more than usual. The trainer allowed this period of recovery because he knew that pushing the men too soon risked permanent injuries. During this time, gladiators reflected on what they had done well and what they needed to improve. They discussed techniques, shared advice, and mentally prepared for the next stage of training. A sense of routine helped the men maintain emotional stability. They relied on the predictable structure of meals, training sessions, rest periods, and communal time. Even though the routine was demanding, it provided a sense of order that softened the fear of the unknown. Predictability became a form of comfort in a life dominated by danger. Hope existed quietly within each man. Some hoped for freedom. Others hoped simply to survive another year. Some wished for improved status within the school. Others longed for small moments. A peaceful night of sleep, a good meal, or a day without pain. These hopes, though modest, helped the men endure the harshness of their lives. Although gladiators faced overwhelming challenges, their strength came not only from physical training, but from the resilience they built through years of hardship. They learned to navigate a world shaped by violence while holding on to pieces of their humanity. They formed friendships, supported one another, and found meaning in shared struggle. Their lives were difficult, but they showed remarkable endurance in the face of relentless pressure. Gladiators lived under a system designed entirely around survival and spectacle. Their lives were shaped by discipline, repetition, and the constant presence of danger, and each man inside the Ludus understood that his value depended on performance, endurance, and obedience. Outside observers often imagined glamorous competitions or heroic rewards, but the truth was far grimmer. Most fighters experienced little more than pain, routine, and the faint, fragile bonds they formed with one another. The days began early, before the sun had fully risen. Men awoke in their crowded quarters, surrounded by the sounds of shifting bodies, creaking wooden bunks, and the occasional groan of pain from muscles stiff from previous drills. Sleep had been scarce for many injuries, nightmares, and the memory of past matches often prevented rest. Yet the routine demanded rising immediately. Any hesitation was noted by the trainers, and hesitation could lead to punishment. Discipline had been strict, often harsh, but it instilled the ability to move and act even under extreme mental or physical fatigue. Morning drills were long, exhausting, and relentless. Gladiators trained to master every movement of their designated fighting style. Some, such as the Mamilo, focused on endurance, shield handling, and short sword strikes. Others, like the Ricciarius, trained for agility, speed, and the careful management of their trident net. Each style required repeated practice of angles, thrusts, and blocks. The drills were not brief. Hours passed under sun or shade, with water breaks only occasionally, enough to prevent collapse, but not enough to ease the strain. The repetition forged precision and instinct, but it also left muscles permanently fatigued and joints swollen from repeated impact. The physical intensity of the day extended to weapon conditioning. Wooden swords, heavier than the real blades, battered muscles and wrists into strength, but caused constant soreness. Shields, sometimes worn for hours in drills, left bruises across the shoulders and forearms. Trainers enforced correct technique, often using sharp corrections or even physical reprimands when mistakes were repeated. Pain was an expected companion. It was present in every movement, every swing, and every step, but it was tolerated because survival depended on mastering it. Food remained simple and practical, emphasizing energy and durability over taste. Gladiators mostly consumed barley, beans, vegetables, and occasionally dried fruit. Meat appeared rarely, typically only after a victory or to aid recovery from injury. Meals were modest but functional. Their diets were designed to create weight, muscle mass, and resilience necessary for enduring the repeated impacts of combat. The perception of luxurious feasting was a myth. Their nourishment served survival, not indulgence. Rest periods, though brief, allowed limited recovery. Evenings offered a small reprieve in the bathhouse, where warm water eased stiffness and some temporary comfort could be found. Fighters often shared whispered conversations or advice, passing knowledge quietly among themselves. These exchanges strengthened bonds, fostering trust and companionship in an otherwise harsh and isolating environment. Yet these moments of connection were fleeting. The demands of the next day, the anticipation of the arena, or the risk of injury returned rapidly. The mental strain paralleled the physical. Gladiators lived with constant uncertainty. Each man knew he might be called to fight at any moment, and the thought of death was ever present. Anxiety, fear, and stress coexisted alongside discipline, courage, and skill. Even skilled fighters could not escape the possibility of sudden, fatal injury. Mental resilience became as vital as physical conditioning. Some men relied on routines, prayers, or small rituals to maintain composure. Others sought comfort in the camaraderie of their companions. Those who could not manage the psychological burden often faltered, showing hesitation that could be deadly. In the Ludus, discipline extended beyond training. Gladiators were controlled in almost every aspect of life. Their movements, meals, and sleep were regulated. Freedom outside the walls was limited. Travel or leisure was forbidden, except for sanctioned events or matches. This control reinforced the understanding that life had little autonomy and that every action was a preparation for combat. The loss of personal freedom, combined with physical hardship, marked the life of a gladiator with a unique intensity. The public perception of gladiators contrasted sharply with reality. In Rome, the crowd admired their courage, endurance, and skill. Stories of victories and displays of bravery circulated widely. Yet, despite this admiration, gladiators remained socially marginalized. Many were slaves or prisoners, and their profession involved violence for entertainment. Respect existed in a narrow sense. Fear and admiration intertwined, but it rarely translated into social equality. Gladiators were celebrated in spectacle, but in daily life, they were subordinate to trainers, owners, and the structures that controlled them. Injuries shaped every aspect of their routine. Even minor cuts or bruises hindered performance. Deeper wounds required the attention of the Ludus healer, who employed practical remedies derived from empirical knowledge rather than formal medicine. Cuts were cleaned with wine or vinegar, stitched, and dressed with herbal poultices. Broken bones were set with splints, often crudely but effectively enough to allow partial healing. Pain persisted, and complete recovery was rare. Gladiators adapted to chronic discomfort as an inherent part of existence. Arena preparation created additional pressures. Prior to entering the amphitheater, fighters were sequestered in holding areas, isolated and tense. The sounds of crowds, animals, and the general chaos filtered through walls, heightening anxiety. Fighters rehearsed movements mentally, adjusted their armor, and sometimes offered prayers to gods, Roman or foreign, for protection. Each fighter understood that instinct and training would govern survival more than divine favor. Mental preparation, calmness under pressure, and the ability to act automatically had been honed for survival. Once in the arena, the environment intensified the danger. Thousands of spectators watched every movement. Sand shifted unpredictably underfoot. The sun reflected harshly off metal and stone, making vision difficult at times. The roar of the crowd demanded performance, yet survival required patience, observation, and precise execution. Fights tested stamina, skill, and mental composure. Even experienced gladiators could be caught off guard by miscalculations or unexpected moves from their opponents. Victory offered temporary relief, but not permanent security. Survival allowed return to the Ludus, but it brought exhaustion, injuries, and ongoing preparation for future matches. Some successful fighters received recognition, small gifts, or privileges within the school. Rarely, repeated victories could bring freedom in the form of the Ludus. However, most fighters continued their struggle in near-continuous cycles of training and combat. Death, injury, and fear remained constant companions. The psychological impact of witnessing death was profound. Gladiators trained alongside men who sometimes perished in the arena. These losses created grief, tension, and emotional fatigue. Some fighters hardened, suppressing sorrow to endure, while others carried the weight of loss quietly, affecting performance and morale. Friendships within the school provided crucial support, yet they also amplified the emotional strain. Losses among companions were particularly harsh, because bonds formed through shared hardship had been intense. The social role of gladiators reflected their ambiguous status. They were objects of admiration, tools of entertainment, and property of the lanista. They navigated a complex social structure in which recognition existed only in the context of spectacle. Outside this framework, they had minimal agency. The distinction between skill and survival blurred. To the public, a victorious fighter represented bravery and strength. To the owner, he represented investment. To the fighter himself, every action was a negotiation between fear, instinct, and discipline. Fighters endured remarkable physical hardship. Years of repetitive motion created calluses, permanent muscle tension, and chronic joint pain. Some men developed injuries that affected mobility for life. Others carried scars from training or combat that marked their bodies permanently. Despite this, the men learned to adjust, to move efficiently even while in pain, and to exploit their conditioning for survival. Physical suffering became normalized, an expected feature of life rather than an exception. Diet, rest, and medical care existed solely to maintain fighting capacity. Food built strength, sleep allowed temporary recovery, medical treatment kept injuries from becoming fatal. Yet these measures never eliminated suffering entirely. Gladiators lived in a constant tension between preparation and risk, between discipline and fear, between survival and the possibility of sudden death. Even in the harshest environments, bonds formed quietly, sustaining mental resilience. Fighters shared advice, comforted one another, and observed rituals that reinforced companionship. Laughter, though rare, echoed in the bathhouse or during meals. Stories of distant homelands, memories of life before captivity, or reflections on minor victories offered mental relief. These small acts of human connection balanced the unrelenting physical and psychological pressures of gladiatorial life. The potential for freedom existed, but it remained distant for most. only a few earned the Ludus, often after years of survival, skill, and luck. Even then, freedom did not erase the emotional scars, chronic pain, or psychological burdens accumulated over years of combat. Most gladiators completed their lives without release, trapped in a system designed to extract skill and entertainment at the cost of autonomy. This combination of brutality, discipline, emotional burden, and occasional camaraderie defined the life of a gladiator. Their existence was harsh, repetitive, and dangerous. Physical endurance, mental resilience, and precise skill became survival tools. Recognition and admiration came rarely and temporarily. Death remained a constant threat both in training and in the arena. And yet, amidst suffering, they forged bonds and displayed courage that survived the arenas and the centuries in memory. Gladiators lived in a world defined by control and limitation. Every aspect of their existence had been shaped by rules, discipline, and the expectation of performance. They trained, ate, and slept according to schedules set by the Lannister or owner of the Ludus, whose primary concern had been maintaining their physical capability for combat. Personal desires, comfort, or leisure had been secondary to this goal, and autonomy had been virtually non-existent. The fighters understood, often painfully, that they were tools of spectacle as much as human beings. Morning routines were long and exhausting. Waking before the sun, gladiators moved from wooden bunks into cold, often cramped spaces. The air carried the scent of sweat, dust, and occasionally antiseptic herbs used to treat minor wounds. Sleep had rarely been deep, interrupted by aches, dreams of past fights, or anxiety over upcoming matches. Many fighters rose slowly at first, aching from injuries sustained during previous drills or arena battles, yet the routine demanded prompt action. Delays or hesitation were corrected by trainers, sometimes through verbal rebuke, sometimes with physical punishment. Warm-up exercises emphasized flexibility, balance, and endurance. Gladiators stretched their stiff muscles, performing movements designed to prepare their bodies for the strain of combat. The Murmillo, for instance, had practiced heavy shield handling and short sword thrusts, while the Retiaris trained with speed, agility, and precise timing to control his trident and net. Repetition dominated these routines. Every motion had to become instinctual, executed even when fatigue threatened concentration. The drills were not just physical, they conditioned the mind to operate under stress, teaching fighters to act without hesitation even in moments of fear. After warm-up, weapons practice dominated the morning. Wooden swords, heavier than real weapons, battered their muscles and wrists, but built the strength and endurance required for survival. Shields, some weighing over 20 pounds, left bruises across shoulders and forearms. Training had often resulted in minor injuries, and the most experienced gladiators knew to accept these as inevitable. Serious injuries were treated by practical healers, who cleaned and stitched wounds and applied poultices made from herbs, vinegar, and wine. Recovery was rarely complete before the next drill. Fighters learned to tolerate persistent pain as a constant companion. Diet was designed for strength and endurance rather than pleasure. Meals consisted primarily of barley, beans, vegetables, and dried fruits. Meat was rare, consumed only on special occasions or after victories. The diet provided energy for long hours of training and thickened the body to absorb blows during combat. Contrary to popular imagination, gladiators did not indulge in feasts or luxury. Their food served survival, conditioning, and durability rather than taste or status. Hydration was constant, though water often came in small amounts to avoid disrupting training. Training continued into the afternoon with sparring and simulated matches. Gladiators of similar skill and style practiced controlled combat, testing timing, technique, and endurance. Wooden swords and padded equipment reduced, but did not eliminate, the risk of injury. Bruised ribs, sprained ankles, and cut forearms remained common. Trainers enforced precise execution. Even slight errors were corrected immediately, often with physical punishment or extended drills. The discipline cultivated through these sessions made instinct the primary tool of survival, as hesitation in the arena could be fatal. The psychological burden of daily life was as harsh as physical demands. Gladiators lived under constant threat of injury or death in training and in combat. Anxiety and fear were ever present, shaping thoughts and behaviors. Even men with years of experience felt the weight of anticipation before matches. They learned mental control, breathing slowly, focusing on instinctive movements, and ignoring pain or distraction. Some found comfort in rituals, prayers, or quiet reflection. Others relied on camaraderie and mutual support among their companions. Friendships formed in the Ludus were intense and resilient. Gladiators shared advice, comforted one another after injuries, and offered guidance during training. Bonds forged through shared hardship helped maintain morale and created a sense of family within the confined, brutal environment. Yet these relationships also carried the risk of grief. Death was common, and the loss of comrades weighed heavily, sometimes more than personal injuries or hardships. Witnessing a friend fall in the arena reminded fighters of their own vulnerability and reinforced the constant presence of fear. Despite their skill, gladiators were acutely aware that public admiration provided limited protection. Crowds cheered for bravery, strength, and dramatic displays, but spectators valued entertainment above life. Successful fighters occasionally received gifts or recognition, and rare victories could earn the wooden sword symbolizing freedom, the rudis. Yet these rewards were exceptions. Most men remained in near continuous cycles of training, combat, and recovery, with survival measured day by day. Death, injury, and exhaustion were constant companions. Arena preparation created additional pressure. Fighters waited in holding cells beneath amphitheaters, listening to the distant roar of the crowd, the shuffle of animals, and the clatter of weapons. The anticipation intensified both focus and fear. Gladiators performed mental rehearsals, adjusted equipment, and prayed to Roman or foreign gods for protection. They relied on instinct and disciplined training more than hope, knowing that survival depended on precise movement and quick reflexes rather than chance. Once in the arena, the environment was overwhelming. The sun reflected off helmets, shields, and the sand below. Thousands of spectators observed every move, cheering or shouting in response to skill, injury, or perceived failure. The sand shifted unpredictably, forcing fighters to adapt constantly. Each strike, block, or movement had been practiced countless times, yet improvisation was necessary. Even minor errors could be fatal. Arena survival required a combination of physical skill, mental control, and deep familiarity with their own abilities. Injuries in the arena were often severe. Gladiators risked broken bones, deep cuts, and internal trauma. Some recovered, while others were permanently disabled. Even after healing, lingering pain and reduced mobility often complicated training and future matches. The Ludus provided care, but treatments were practical rather than gentle. Fighters learned to endure discomfort, adapt movements, and maintain readiness despite chronic injury. The social perception of gladiators remained complex. They were admired for courage and strength, yet socially marginalized due to the violent nature of their profession. Respect existed mainly in the context of spectacle, and fighters occupied a liminal space, simultaneously celebrated and disdained. Popularity could bring temporary recognition, but it rarely altered the structure of control imposed by owners and trainers. Gladiators were valued for survival and entertainment rather than autonomy or dignity. Daily routines also involved maintenance of equipment and personal care. Armor, shields, and weapons were inspected and repaired regularly. Fighters cleaned their gear, polished helmets, and adjusted straps. Proper maintenance could prevent injuries caused by equipment failure. Bathing provided temporary relief for sore muscles, though injuries often limited complete relaxation. Gladiators learned to balance physical conditioning, mental focus, and equipment readiness as interconnected aspects of survival. Sleep remained difficult. Many fighters experienced lingering pain, anxiety about upcoming matches, or emotional strain from witnessing injuries and deaths. Despite exhaustion, deep rest was rare. Sleep became fragmented, a brief recovery period rather than a full escape. Dreams often revisited past matches or fears, reinforcing the psychological burden. Even so, the routine of returning to the sleeping quarters after training and the brief social interactions with companions provided small comfort. Medical care was pragmatic. Minor injuries were treated on site with herbal poultices, compresses, and bandages. More severe wounds required specialized attention, including crude surgery, suturing, or splints. Chronic injuries and untreated trauma remained common. Gladiators developed resilience, learning to manage persistent pain while continuing daily training. Healing occurred alongside preparation, emphasizing recovery that allowed return to combat rather than full restoration. The life of a gladiator involved repetition, discipline, and the constant presence of danger. Physical strength, mental endurance, and precise skill formed the pillars of survival. Friendship and camaraderie offered emotional support. Recognition, rewards, and fame existed but were fleeting. Death and injury remained pervasive. The combination of harsh training, rigorous discipline, and relentless performance made their lives simultaneously structured and unpredictable. Survival required adaptation, resilience, and a capacity to endure pain, both physical and emotional. The world of gladiators illustrates a society built on spectacle, violence, and strict control. Within it, men developed extraordinary skill and endurance, endured chronic suffering, and navigated emotional strain. Bonds among fighters sustained them amid loss. Reward was rare, freedom was even rarer. Their existence demonstrated the interplay between discipline, survival, and human resilience, offering insight into the realities behind the popular image of glory and fame. Beneath the surface of daily training, a gladiator's world carried constant, quiet tension that most outsiders never noticed. The physical pain of practice and combat was obvious, but the psychological strain was subtle, pervasive, and deeply shaping. Gladiators lived with the constant knowledge that every choice, every hesitation, could have immediate consequences, not just in the arena, but inside the school itself. They adapted to this tension gradually, but it left marks on their minds as enduring as the scars on their bodies. Most gladiators understood, almost instinctively, the balance between caution and aggression. Hesitation in training or in a match could bring punishment or injury. Overconfidence could do the same. Each fighter spent hours internalizing the rhythms of combat, repeating movements until they became reflexive. This repetition built not only physical resilience, but mental resilience. The ability to act decisively under pressure, to quiet fear, and to rely on instinct. Still, fear never disappeared. It was a quiet companion lurking in every step, every swing, every stance. The social dynamics within the Ludus added another layer of complexity. Fighters lived closely together in cramped quarters, often with men from vastly different regions, cultures, and backgrounds. Many were enslaved, others were prisoners of war, and a few had volunteered. Each carried past experiences, beliefs, and customs that shaped interactions. These differences sometimes caused friction but also offered opportunities for exchange. Men shared techniques, survival strategies, and, quietly, pieces of their old worlds, memories, stories, and fragments of culture from distant lands. In this way, the school became not only a place of physical conditioning, but a strange, cross-cultural society bound by necessity. Hierarchy within the school was strict but nuanced. The lanista held ultimate authority, but respect among gladiators was earned through skill, experience, and resilience. Older, seasoned fighters commanded informal influence. Their advice, correction, or protection carried weight, even when it conflicted with the Lannister's orders. Younger fighters often deferred to veterans, learning not only techniques, but strategies for navigating the mental and emotional landscape of their confined, dangerous life. Bonds formed through shared hardship created trust, but these same bonds heightened grief when injuries or deaths occurred. Every loss reinforced the fragility of existence inside the walls. Some of the less visible pressures came from the economic and political structure surrounding the games. Gladiators were property, investments in the entertainment system. Their value was measured not by human dignity but by skill, endurance, and the ability to survive long enough to fight repeatedly. Owners monitored progress closely. Injuries were costly, and the careful balance between pushing a fighter to excel and preserving his capacity was a constant concern. Even successful fighters might find themselves moved between schools, sold, or reassigned for reasons entirely unrelated to their preferences. Autonomy was almost non-existent. Survival required adaptation, obedience, and cunning. The psychological impact of combat was profound and often underestimated. Death was common, and a gladiator rarely fought alone. Comrades fell beside them, sometimes publicly, sometimes privately. The repetition of this loss created a quiet, cumulative trauma. Some men developed coping mechanisms, rituals, silence, or mental compartmentalization, allowing them to continue training and fighting. Others became visibly hardened, stoic, or withdrawn. The emotional landscape was as dangerous as the physical one. Mental resilience was not optional, it was essential for survival. Another hidden challenge was the physical toll of repetitive injury. Even small wounds, if inadequately healed, reduced mobility, strength, and coordination. Over years, cumulative trauma could cause chronic pain, joint degeneration, and lingering fatigue. Gladiators adapted their movements to protect injured limbs, which could alter fighting techniques subtly. These adaptations were necessary for survival, but often left permanent limitations. Pain was both constant and normalized. Fighters developed extraordinary tolerance, but rarely experienced complete comfort. Sleep and rest, though brief, were crucial for recovery. Even minor fatigue could impair reflexes or weaken concentration, increasing risk in both training and combat. Sleep often occurred in crowded, noisy quarters, with men pressed closely together. Injured or sore fighters sometimes struggled to find positions that did not exacerbate pain. Dreams often reflected memories of matches, injuries, or past traumas, reinforcing the mental strain. Still, sleep provided the only respite, a momentary pause from constant vigilance and physical exertion. Gladiators' diets were deliberately structured to support this harsh life. High in carbohydrates and low in luxury, food provided energy and mass rather than pleasure. Barley, beans, and dried fruits dominated meals. Occasional meat supplemented recovery but was rare. These rations maintained the body for prolonged physical activity, thickened muscles for protection, and aided endurance. Hunger and discomfort were rarely absent, reinforcing the idea that life was measured by resilience rather than indulgence. The public perception of gladiators contrasted sharply with the reality of their lives. Spectators admired bravery, strength, and spectacle. Writers and poets celebrated skillful fighters and dramatic matches. Yet behind the cheering and applause, the men endured extreme pain, risk, and strict control. Fame offered recognition but not security. Even those considered stars remained at the mercy of owners, trainers, and the demands of the arena. Their lives were simultaneously visible and constrained, celebrated and exploited. The rarity of freedom added complexity. The Ludus, a wooden sword symbolizing release from combat, was a possible reward for only a few. Achieving this status required skill, longevity, and often luck. Most men never reached this milestone, continuing in the cycles of training, combat, injury, and recovery for years or even decades. Even those granted freedom often faced lingering physical and psychological burdens. The scars, both visible and invisible, remained. Pain, trauma, and memory did not vanish with the ceremonial gesture of release. Gladiators' lives also intersected with the broader Roman social and political system. The games served multiple purposes: entertainment, political control, and demonstration of wealth and power. Each match reinforced social hierarchies and cultural values. Gladiators became symbols within this system, embodying courage, endurance, and spectacle. Yet they rarely enjoyed the social privileges that accompanied symbolic status. Their bodies were instruments, their lives expendable in service to spectacle. Understanding this broader context highlights the structural pressures that shaped every aspect of their daily existence. Within the school, the men developed survival strategies beyond physical skill. Emotional intelligence, understanding the moods of trainers, the tendencies of companions, and the subtleties of authority was essential. Social navigation became intertwined with physical survival. A fighter who misread a situation might suffer punishment, be sidelined from matches, or provoke conflict. Diplomacy, discretion, and observation were learned skills, often as important as sword technique. Success depended not only on strength or skill, but on understanding the human dynamics surrounding them. The emotional impact of witnessing death, suffering, and injury within the school created long-term psychological effects. Men learned to suppress fear, manage grief, and compartmentalize trauma. These coping mechanisms allowed daily function, but left scars that persisted long after matches ended. The combination of repetitive training, public combat, and communal living forged resilience, but it came at a cost. Many fighters carried anxiety, hyper-vigilance, or emotional fatigue throughout their lives. Even in these conditions, small acts of humanity persisted. Fighters shared knowledge, offered comfort, and occasionally provided material aid, such as extra food or care for wounds. These gestures were fleeting but meaningful, sustaining mental and emotional well-being. Trust and loyalty within the Ludus became crucial survival tools. While competition existed, cooperation often outweighed rivalry in determining who could endure the harsh conditions of training and combat. The rhythm of life followed a pattern that intertwined physical, emotional, and social pressures. Morning drills built endurance. Weapon practice honed skill. Sparring reinforced instinct. Meals provided fuel. Rest offered partial recovery. Social interactions allowed guidance, comfort, and support. The anticipation of combat hung over all activities, shaping decisions, relationships, and daily behavior. Life was structured yet unpredictable, disciplined yet dangerous. Every element prepared gladiators for survival in a system designed to extract performance, not to nurture humanity. The juxtaposition of skill, brutality, and human connection defined gladiators' existence. Their endurance reflected not only physical conditioning, but also mental adaptation to chronic stress. Bonds among fighters offered emotional refuge. Recognition was fleeting. Injury, trauma, and death remained constants. Freedom existed, but was rare and often incomplete. The totality of their experience revealed a complex interplay between human resilience and systemic exploitation. Gladiators survived not only through strength but through discipline, awareness, and mutual reliance. Gladiators' lives were brutal in ways that went far beyond what most people imagined. While popular culture often focused on the drama of the arena, crowds, flashy victories, and prizes, the reality was far harsher. Most gladiators never experienced fame or wealth. Their days were filled with long hours of grueling training, repetitive drills, and constant physical punishment. Injuries were common, and pain was a permanent companion. Even surviving in the arena did not guarantee safety, as one misstep or a single misjudged strike could result in death. Their mental lives were just as challenging. Fear, anxiety, and uncertainty shadowed every action. Gladiators lived with the constant awareness that their bodies were tools for entertainment, and their personal desires or safety were secondary to the needs of the games. Many endured deep emotional strain, witnessing the deaths and injuries of companions, living with the knowledge that each fight could be their last. They developed coping mechanisms, mental compartmentalization, rituals, quiet reflection, and camaraderie. To survive these pressures, the structure of the Ludus reinforced this relentless intensity. Trainers and owners enforced strict discipline, controlling almost every aspect of daily life: waking, sleeping, eating, training, and resting. Even small failures or perceived weakness could result in punishment. Survival demanded endurance, skill, obedience, and an ability to adapt quickly to both physical and social pressures. Within this environment, gladiators formed bonds of friendship and loyalty, helping each other endure, but also experiencing grief and fear when comrades were injured or killed. Diet, medical care, and equipment maintenance were all aimed at survival and performance rather than comfort. Meals were simple, functional, and often sparse. Injuries were treated practically with herbal remedies, vinegar, wine, and rudimentary stitching. Recovery was rarely complete before returning to training. Armor, weapons, and shields were maintained meticulously because failure in the arena could mean death. Every day revolved around preparing for combat, yet combat was never predictable. The arena itself amplified the intensity of their lives. Fighters stepped onto the sand under the gaze of thousands of spectators, facing opponents trained just as rigorously. The environment was harsh, shifting sand, blinding sunlight, and the constant roar of the crowd added psychological and physical stress. Matches demanded instinctive action, precise technique, and endurance. Survival required both skill and mental fortitude, often more than courage or strength alone. Even victories brought only temporary relief. Recognition, applause, or gifts were fleeting, and the risk of the next fight remained. The Ludus, symbolizing freedom, was an extremely rare reward, available to only a small percentage of fighters after many years of survival. For most, freedom never came, and they spent their lives in cycles of training, injury, and combat. Their existence was a testament to resilience, endurance, and the human capacity to endure suffering under extreme conditions. The social perception of gladiators added another layer of difficulty. They were admired and feared, celebrated and marginalized. While crowds cheered skill and bravery, gladiators remained socially subordinate, often enslaved or prisoners, objects of entertainment. Fame existed only in the context of spectacle, and the men had little control over their lives. Their value lay in performance and survival, not in autonomy or dignity. In conclusion, the brutal life of a Roman gladiator was defined by relentless physical strain, psychological tension, social marginalization, and constant proximity to death. Their daily routines combined grueling training, repetitive drills, practical but limited medical care, and preparation for combat in a system designed to extract performance above all else. Pain, injury, fear, and uncertainty were constants. Bonds among fighters, occasional recognition, and the rare hope of freedom provided moments of comfort, but they were rare and fragile. Survival demanded skill, endurance, and extraordinary mental resilience. In truth, the glamorous image of gladiators winning prizes and glory rarely matched the harsh, exhausting, and dangerous reality of their lives. And now, to close softly, I want to thank you for listening. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history, exploring the lives of men who lived under extreme conditions, who faced fear and pain every day, and who survived through resilience and discipline. Thank you for letting your mind travel slowly into the world of the Roman Ludus, letting yourself understand the complexity of these lives. Your patience, attention, and willingness to listen make this shared exploration possible. If you enjoyed this history narration, please make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another calming history story. Share this with friends who love history, relaxation, or bedtime stories. Your support helps keep these videos coming and allows us to continue bringing the past to a way that is gentle, clear, and informative. Thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and thank you for allowing yourself to rest while learning about the remarkable endurance of Roman gladiators. May your nights be calm, and may your curiosity about history continue to grow.